his trip inspired all of us in a very difficult and challenging time, right? I mean, for him to be riding across the country, taking some risk doing it, all kinds of risks, besides it being the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, you know, he's riding by himself on a bicycle across the country.
I know it was a personal challenge for him and that he's wanted to do it for a long time in his life, to be able to ride across the United States. But to do it at age 60, to do it with construction boots on that ended up almost falling apart by the end of the trip, to do it with 70 pounds of extra weight between the bike and the supplies, to do it by himself without a chase car, just is astonishing to me.
I feel like the next time I go to an event when the pandemic ends and there's an icebreaker, I'll be like, my fun fact is my father biked across the country and raised some money for this really awesome organization. Let me tell you about it.
Hi, Erik Andrews, ErikAndrews. I have just completed, over the course of the last 3 months, a bicycle ride from the West Coast to the East Coast. And it's been a wonderful experience. So when the year started, there was nothing in the planning or look ahead for 2020 that probably any of us foresaw. Who knew, right, what was coming? And in my case, what was coming was ankle surgery, and recovering from that ankle surgery in time to go, as I have for the last 24 years, down to Appalachia to do home repair with about 40 or 45 high school students. But it didn't turn out that way. The day before my ankle surgery was the day that the Cleveland Clinic postponed their elective surgeries. And so with no surgery, and clearly with, and this is mid-March now, with the coronavirus being something that was starting to be a real thing to a lot of people and causing impact around, it was clear that one of those impacts on this Appalachia Service Project that I volunteered with for many years was at risk.
Yeah, Appalachia Service Project is a 52-year-old volunteer service organization that does home repairs and replacement throughout central Appalachia. We also hire college staff and have a huge summer program, which is what Erik's most familiar with and been involved in. The summer program will have about 10,000 youth and about 4,000 adults that will come and serve in the 5 states of central Appalachia, doing home repairs for low-income families.
The Appalachia Service Project is a faith-based ministry, a faith-based service project that was started back in 1969 by a pastor named Tex Evans,
who was a United Methodist minister, came up to this area from East Texas and actually started out at Union College in Barberville, Kentucky. That first year, and there were about 50 volunteers, worked on 4 homes, and now we're up to 14,000 volunteers working on 400 homes a year. And so some good growth, and we build new homes as well now, and we'll build 20 to 25 of those every year as well. So
by the end of April, they did in fact cancel their summer program, which is the meat and potatoes of their warmer, safer, drier mission of doing home repair in about 25 or 30 counties out in Appalachia.
Our summer program probably represents 70-some% of our ministry, and certainly represents 70-some% of our revenue stream. And so not only was it a hit to our mission and what we try to accomplish, it was a huge hit to us fiscally, to make it through financially. So it was a very difficult time.
Knowing that that was going to put a severe crimp in their finances and in their planning and their ability to help and serve others with more effective housing needs. Combining that with a lifelong desire to do some bicycling, cross-country bicycling, I first started thinking about that, in late March and early April. It morphed into borrowing my brother's bike, getting a bunch of miles under my belt, getting my own bike, and the gear that I would need there were a number of hurdles. First, could I do this? Could I go back to back to back with 50, 60, 70 mile days? And then was the gear that I had, was that going to be up to it? And that's where acquiring some newer gear was important. But then it even expanded beyond that. We had this coronavirus causing shutdowns all over the country, and one of the places that the shutdown was most significant was in California, which, if you're doing some cross-country biking, is where you're going to start if you're going west to east. So it became a situation where you weren't necessarily sure you could actually make the trip. But then in mid-May, California announced some opening plans. It became clear I would be able to either stay at a hotel or a campground, along with getting food at stores and things like that. So it was something that after mid-May, I felt comfortable sharing with the broader family. My wife and I had been planning some of that from well in advance. You know, a few weeks before that really was about all we had.
Dad sent a text to our family group chat, and it was basically saying, I've had this thing on my bucket list for my entire life. You know, I biked around when I was younger, and I have always really wanted to do a cross-country trip. And the pandemic has, in a way, made it possible because, you know, I'm not going to be spending a week at ASP. He'd played that pretty close to the vest up until pretty close to when he was going to leave. So by the time he even told us, it was like 3 weeks out. And we were like, oh my gosh, what? You're biking across the country? And he was like, yeah. And we were like, we had a lot of questions. So it was things like, how are you going to stay safe? And where are you going to sleep? And are you sure? And have you been practicing? Have you been training? This is so, but at the same time, you're so excited because it's hard to not even hear his enthusiasm for both something on his bucket list, like biking across the country, and also doing it in support of ASP, an organization that means so much to him.
And I get a text that Erik and his wife are getting on an airplane and flying to California. I mean, right when he was in the airport. I mean, that's how late in the process I found out about this trip. And that and then he tells me he's flying to California, where he's going to then ride his bike back across the country, and he wants to use it to support ASP. And I mean, this is like a day or two before the journey begins. And I was like, oh my.
You got to consider everything that you're going to take, and some things make the cut and some things don't. I kind of decided it looked like about 3 days of gear, of biking gear, and 3 days worth of regular clothing would be about the limit to add to all the things that you have to have if you're going to camp: tents and sleeping bags and the various camping gear. Of course, you've got a tool bag. Of course, you've got a first aid kit. You put all that together along with some electronics, because I'm going to try and do a little bit of blogging or a little bit of picture taking along the way. And pretty quick you get to about 40 pounds, particularly when you talk about the food and drink, the liquids you need to carry to sustain you through some of those extended periods where there's no stop options. So my plan was to do in the 50 to 60 mile range, give or take, depending on how much climbing I would necessarily have to do. But a lot of times you don't have a say in a precise number, right? I mean, you say 50, well, that may be in the middle of nowhere, right? So sometimes you have to make choices, and out west, sometimes those choices are 40 versus 80 or 60 versus 100, and you don't have options. So you got to plan each day. You've got to do some planning about how and where you're going to go. The longest unsupported stretch is a 90-mile stretch in the Mojave Desert. And that of course was one that was weighing on my mind until it happened. But there were other 40, 50, 60-mile stretches that you just do. The first day was wonderful because Michelle was there. My wife was there to see me off, to take a video of me climbing out of the parking lot that first day up against the Pacific Ocean. And it was a ride that I knew because during the times that I'd been out to the Vandenberg Air Force Base for launches, I'd ridden those roads many times, so I knew exactly what I was getting into that first day. What I didn't know was how it would impact it to have 40 extra pounds on my bicycle with me. And it was definitely noticeable in the climbs through the Goleta Pass, but it wasn't something that I couldn't do. And she was there waiting for me, and we went to dinner. So that first day was good. It was all the emotions of uncertainty and nervousness and apprehension. They're all there, but you've got a lifeline waiting for you at the end, and that's helpful. Day 2, she headed out and came back to Ohio, and then I was on my own. So there were a couple decisions that I had to make in my planning about what route I would take. There's some national and regional bicycle clubs that work with local governments and state governments to establish bike routes, both across the U.S. and regionally. So Adventure Cycling is one group that has a number of routes, and one of them is a route along the old historic U.S. Route 66. So there's now a bicycle Route 66 that traces its route from Chicago to LA, or in my case, from LA to Chicago. But I'm not interested in turning northeast to go to Chicago, but rather continuing eastward. So I followed along on that bike Route 66 from Los Angeles over to Oklahoma City. And from there were other regional routes that I was on periodically. East Coast Bike Club and others have routes in the east, and there's some in Tennessee as well. So I was following those routes when they were available, but other days, through some of those regions, you're just making your own. California is where I started, and then this U.S. Route 66 takes me through Arizona, New Mexico, the Panhandle of Texas, which includes Amarillo, and then through Oklahoma to Oklahoma City, where I got off U.S. 66 and onto U.S. 64 corridor, roughly speaking. And then followed that through over to Arkansas, into Tennessee, Virginia, and then through Washington, D.C. to Maryland, and on to Delaware and Rehoboth Beach, where I ended. I work at NASA when I'm not on a bicycle, and so that's my day job. And one of the things that I was thinking is, I'm really not sure how up to a lot of climbing in the mountains I might be. And so one of the things that I was very cognizant of is what route might require the least amount of up and down and cycling. So my experience with NASA has been to launch from both coasts, and so I actually, in the guise of going from one NASA launch center to the other, found I could kind of escape the Appalachian Mountains, right? I could just ride along the Gulf Coast. And so having that opportunity to not do extra climbing. But the more and more I read about that route in the summertime, there really was a lot of oppressive heat, and I was starting to have second thoughts about that. And then once I started and I was able to do the climbs that were necessary in the Sierra Nevadas and in the Rocky Mountains and getting past the Continental Divide, it became apparent to me anyway that I was going to be able, and the bike was going to be able to make it, and we could do those Appalachian Mountains. We could go through Tennessee. We can go through Virginia. We can make that happen. And given that I was proposing to raise some money for ASP, it certainly made sense. I was hearing this calling. ASP headquarters is in Johnson City, Tennessee, which is way in the northeast corner of Tennessee, and I could feel called to making my way over there to Johnson City. And so that's what I did. I transitioned from going south to avoid the Appalachian Mountains, which was really where I kind of was starting, to establishing that, yes, I can do this and I will go to ASP headquarters. The Southwest is an area of our country that has many, many beautiful formations, as well as the rocks and the geology of the area is just terrific. And so one of the things that certainly impressed me most was in the summer of pandemic, where the COVID is a tragedy worldwide, One of the things that it allowed was some very solo, very individual cycling around the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon does most of its tourist trade in the summer with international visitors and folks from distant states. Well, very few of those people are around in the summer of 2020. The other thing that the Grand Canyon does as far as a national park goes is they transport their customers, their visitors, their tourists by tour buses, but those tour buses weren't running. So the parts of the park along the South Rim that are serviced by tour bus only or by foot or bicycle, you really had to yourself because the tour buses weren't running. So you combine the severe shrinkage of the tourist population without the transportation to get to some parts of the park. It really provided an opportunity to be you alone with the canyon, and it was really, really remarkable. From Flagstaff, you go north about 50 miles to the Grand Canyon, and then you're on the South Rim at this point. And the South Rim, you go about 10 miles or 12 miles to the west, and that's all shuttle bus only, or bikers or hikers. So no shuttle buses, nobody's hiking 12 miles, at least not at 8 or 9 in the morning, right? And there were no other bicyclists. So I was out there all the way to Hermit's Rest just on my own. Well, in the Canyon Village, there were a few folks. Hotels were there, but at half capacity, and only half of them were open. Only a couple of the restaurants were open, and they were socially spaced, so they weren't serving many customers. It really was remarkable how empty it was and how much alone you could feel in touch with the canyon. So one of the parts of the planning phase of this trip was when I was talking with Michelle and working over kind of the route and the timing. She really wanted to have the summer often is a time when we get together with family, both our own and extended family. So she was saying, give us a weekend to come home. And so as I was moving from the west to the east, Albuquerque, New Mexico became a place where there were some friends, thanks Rob, thanks Cheryl for keeping my gear. And then I flew back to Cleveland for 3 or 4 days. Turns out my son was asking his longtime girlfriend for her hand in marriage. So I got to be here as they got engaged, and granted it's a small celebration. Everything is a small celebration in 2020. But it was great to be back in this area as that celebration was going on. There's any number of stories from the road. Riding by yourself on Interstate 40 because there's been an accident and water bottles are strewn all over the highway and a bicycle is the only one that can get by. These are things you won't ever experience again. Riding your bike down the middle of an interstate by yourself, right? That kind of thing.
For the first 2/3 of the journey, he was just kind of a guy out there on his own doing his own thing. And I would every time he'd give me a report or something, I would post it on my Facebook site, and we would try to share a little bit as ASP, but there was no real avenue of connection to bring our constituency in the way we wanted it first. And luckily, he has that great friend in Nashville who is a PR person who really kind of helped all of us get the ball rolling so we could finish really strong on his trip.
Hi, my name is Steve Merrill, and I'm from Franklin, Tennessee, originally from Oberlin, Ohio. Eric and I went to high school together. He graduated in 78, me in 77. And so we've known each other ever since we were little tiny kids. I run a consulting firm here in Franklin. I spent 20 years in the nonprofit world before that. And I try to help nonprofits out do better with their fundraising, with their marketing, with their branding. And I also do some branding for other companies as well through logo design and through social media and web presence.
Steve was wonderful from the idea of his background gives him he has a lot of great ideas about how to raise awareness. One of the things that we're looking to do, that I'm looking to do, is raise awareness of ASP and its mission, its service.
So I found out about it right after he started, right after he left Surf, California. I was following him on Facebook and following out, where he was and looking at some of the pictures and some of the other things. And, I saw a gigantic opportunity for him when it really got going, and he was going over Route 66. And I saw that he was going into places, and saw that he was walking into restaurants and walking into hotels and walking into convenience stores to buy his Diet Pepsis or his Gatorades. Who's going to know what he's trying to do? Unless he actually says something. Oh, I'm just riding my bike across the country. No big deal. No, we needed to find a way to brand this ride. And once we found out that his route was going to take him through here, so we actually stayed in our house and we fed him and took him out to eat, and I created some signs for his bike. And when he came to town, first thing he wanted to do was eat at the Loveless Cafe, which is a famous restaurant in Nashville, with phenomenal biscuits and chicken and pretty typical Southern fare. And then we got all the new signs we got for his bike. And
Steve said, well, let's put something on your bike. And by the time I was there, he was ready with the stuff that's on the bike now. He's already got some ideas and has got some placards to put on the bike. And I think they really helped the bike pop. And after I stopped there and we put those on the bike, every time I stopped at a convenience store or anywhere to get a drink or to get something to eat, the conversation, I didn't have to lead into that conversation. The conversation was just going to happen because people were going to ask about it. Steve had provided me with a little bit of literature to just talk about what I was doing and what ASP is about. And all that was very helpful to raising awareness.
At that point, I realized that this is an unbelievable accomplishment. Let's do more to promote it. So I built two social media pages and built a web page for him. Put a Google map together so you knew where he was and could see his route and how many miles he went every ride. I wanted to try to brand this as something so it had a name. So we came up with Pedaling Across America for the Appalachia Service Project.
Yeah, so from Northeast Tennessee, you can actually, if you follow that Interstate 81, US Route 11 corridor, you actually go straight from Tennessee into Virginia. And then you've got a long stretch of Virginia, kind of along the Blue Ridge Mountains are kind of just to your east, and then the Shenandoah National Park where Skyline Drive is. So you're kind of riding right along in that Skyline Drive area and Shenandoah National Park. And then once you cross over that, you've kind of crossed from the last ridges of the Appalachia into kind of the coastal plain with some rolling hills initially, but then it really flattens out as you get close to Washington, D.C. and on toward Maryland and the Delaware beaches. 24 years of volunteering, but I'd never been to the headquarters of the ASP organization, so I did get to visit.
What an amazing day. So first of all, we were on a mandatory work at home for our staff, right? So really at headquarters, there's very few people around most of the time. So we sent out an email and said, hey, Erik's coming into town and we want to be able to greet him. And we want as many of you as feel comfortable to come in that day. So when he comes, we can greet him. And I said, we will do this in our warehouse, which is where we keep our tools and a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of space there so that we could do social distancing, right? Stay 6 foot apart.
And that was a very nice reception that ASP provided. I had a couple longtime ASP folks that have been full of the ASP mission in their lives. Abraham and Aaron rode with me those last 10 or 12 miles in Johnson City, before Johnson City, into Johnson City, and through to the ASP headquarters. which was nice. That was the first time at any point in the ride that someone had ridden with me, and I very much valued that.
Well, I mean, we had about 30 folks show up that morning, which was just amazing. And what we did was our garage is kind of arranged, our warehouse, where you can drive through it. So our people lined up on both sides all the way through the garage, 6 foot apart, going out into the parking lot. And when Erik rode in, he rode through this gauntlet of applause, people applauding. And it was just like, I mean, I got chill bumps. I mean, it was just really a moving moment when he rode through all of those people. We awarded him our Medal of Distinction, which, by the way, has only gone to a handful of people in our history. You know, I mean, he is a rocket scientist, right? You know, I mean, it's one of these things where, you know, you talk to him and sometimes, you know, his passion for ASP, you forget that he has another life.
And then we had a little reception and a little session there at headquarters, and a chance to look around in a place that I'd never been. And it's really a pretty amazing place that you think of all the hundreds and hundreds of home repairs that are done every year based on the logistics and the planning that these dedicated individuals do out of that Johnson City headquarters with all their vehicle fleet and their supply warehouses and things like that. One other thing that particularly I found effective and touching for me was that I wanted to connect myself to ASP throughout the ride. And one of the ways that I did that was I decided to wear the boots that I would be on the work site with out in Appalachia. I chose to wear those boots for the course of this ride. So from June 7th in California to August 20th out in Rehoboth Beach, I was in my work boots every day as I was bicycling across the country. And that may sound weird. Several bicyclists said, "You're crazy." But I will say that it did provide a connection for me. Every time I looked down, every time I got on and off my bike, I was aware that I was what I was riding for.
We got him some new work boots, by the way. His work boots were wearing out, they were tearing and stuff. So one of the things we gave him was a gift certificate so he could get some new work boots. So he's got his new work boots now. So
at this point, there's more attention being paid. ASP people are aware. ASP as an organization has board members that are in the DC area, but they also have a number of groups and churches that volunteer from that area. So there were any number of folks that were well-wishers, were supporters. A couple of the board members, Ken and Bill, they helped arrange this TV interview on the National Mall. There was one other point that came on later where Sarah, my daughter, which I was so thankful for, that she could join me for the last couple rides on the Eastern Shore in Maryland and Delaware. She joined me for those last 85 miles of the ride. So
the original idea to join Dad was, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, right? He's, you know, I don't want to say never, but it's likely this probably won't happen again. So I didn't want to miss out on that chance to join him for such an important ride for him.
While she had always expressed an interest in riding part of the route with me, it was something that wasn't going to be realistic until I got further east. So anyway, as I was getting a little bit closer, we started to do the planning, and it became clear that those last couple rides on the Eastern Shore, both meaningful in that I'm finishing, but meaningful in that she would be able to ride those with me, it was becoming clear she was going to be able to do that, and so I was very thankful for that.
John and I were on our way back from New York, and Mom was driving through to meet him at the end. So Mom stopped in Camp Hill for an overnight, and then we drove the rest of the way into Maryland, and we picked him up on the west end of the Bay Bridge. And then we got across the bridge, because you're not allowed to bike across the bridge, and we dropped him off, and then I got out of the car with him, and then I biked the rest of the way.
Oh, it was very nice that Michelle, again, to the rescue, brought Sarah to this area from Harrisburg and picked me up. We crossed the bridge, and then Sarah and I got out and we started riding. So that was Day 59 out of our 60 days of riding was a 65-mile day with Sarah. And of course, in this day, she ended up having a flat tire.
I had a flat tire the second to last ride. And so I had my fingers crossed that that was the only one that we were going to have. But thankfully Dad was there that day. So, he was like, oh, that's okay. All right, let's move off the road. And he, quickly flipped it over, and I had brought extra tubes, and he, honestly did most of the dirty work and then was like, good to go. And I was like, thanks, Dad.
And then to this church in Maryland, to this community in Maryland where I'd started doing ASP weeks, I thought it would be perfect to stop there. And indeed, that was a very fulfilling stop along the way. It was going to Davidsonville, Maryland, where I first started doing ASP.
It's funny because it felt a little bit like full circle, because these folks were around at the very beginning of Dad's ASP adventures back in the day. And then here they are kind of like welcoming him in on his penultimate ride on this cross-country journey that he's bicycled in support of ASP. So that was great. That second to last day was, obviously there are lots of special things about our final ride type thing, but that penultimate ride was also really special. It was a lot longer, so Dad and I had a lot more time to just bike and chat and enjoy being outside, and it was nice. But that last ride it felt really triumphant, and I know that I would hazard a guess that we didn't talk quite as much that ride because Dad was mentally busy working through what it meant to him to be finally finishing this ride that's taken 3 months type thing. And so we did talk a little bit about what he was thinking, and it's bittersweet and it's melancholy, but it's also so exciting. As we kind of came up to Route 1 and we biked along Route 1 for a little bit, and then we took 1A down into the heart of Rehoboth, and this is a road that I've walked many times, and I'm very familiar with where things are, and I know how close we are to the ocean. And I'm like, I can't believe it. We're it's finally happening. But for Dad, it's been how many, thousands of miles, and he's finally making his way down Rehoboth Avenue towards the Atlantic Ocean, and it's right there, and I'm so close we can taste it. And we kind of biked through a little bit of a park, and we came around this hotel right at the north end of the Rehoboth Boardwalk, and I was like, it's here, we're rounding this corner, and this is the last corner. The beach is right there. I'm so excited. And Dad turned the corner, and then Dad ended up riding around and coming south along whatever that first street is in Rehoboth that kind of hits the north end of the boardwalk. He was coming down the street, and he got up on the sidewalk, but then the sidewalk obviously morphs into the beach. And so right at that point, he had to turn a little bit, and his back tire kind of slipped out. And I was like, oh my goodness, but thankfully he's so quick on his feet. So he managed to catch himself. It didn't actually fall, but there was a little bit of oh, whoops, right there at the end. And so then he kind of put his feet down and then walked his bike, the next 15 yards or so to the ASP banner, where they kind of had 3351 and done, or whatever the number was. And they had an ASP live stream, and they had, there were a few local reporters there who were interested in doing interviews and whatnot. And at that point, he was still kind of at the top of the sand dune that's at the back of the beach, and he hadn't quite made it to the water yet. And so after a while, he was like, can you just hold on for 1 minute? And so he walked he got off his bike, and he walked it the rest of the way down the other side of the sand dune and through the sand, and everyone's of course wait, and they're running up with their cameras to make sure that they catch the shot of him dipping his front tire in the Atlantic Ocean. And so he finally made it. And so he walked up, work boots and all, on the beach with a bicycle, and he finally got there, and he dipped his front tire in the Atlantic, and he just took a minute to be this is it. It's done. I did it. I dipped my back tire in the Pacific. And then 3 months later, after this entire journey, both the physical and emotional and mental journey of biking across the country and doing it for such a wonderful, amazing organization, it it was funny because, everyone was there and everyone was, spaced out given the pandemic. But he took a minute to just kind of this is it. This really happened. It's done. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful to be able to watch him kind of finish out like that. So, and the fact that so many people were able to come and be there with him at the end was great. So many folks from the past, so many people from the present. It was beautiful.
Yeah, so it turns out that the fundraising story is really a pretty special story to go along with this ride. Just in the last couple days, we've had a couple more donors contribute that have pushed this ride over $60,000 of money raised. And so the money raised now is matching the number of rides, which was 60, and my age, which is 60. So I think we are now wrapping up that fundraising aspect of the story at $60,000, and it's just been a real blessing to all those warmer, safer, drier repairs that'll be able to be made at the homes in Appalachia.
Yeah, well, and so here's the thing about Erik and his ride. I mean, he'd raised about $20,000 when he got to headquarters in East Tennessee, right? And then it's just like our folks just jumped on board. We got some matching gifts, and it was just wonderful to end up at 60 grand. But the thing about it is the money's secondary here. I mean, to us, his trip inspired all of us in a very difficult and challenging time, right? I mean, for him to be riding across the country, taking some risk doing it, all kinds of risks besides it being the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, he's riding by himself on a bicycle across the country. As anyone knows, between traffic and things that can happen along the way, I mean, it was a risky journey. And he inspired all of us. And as we shared his story, with our constituents, it inspired all of them that, what can we do in the midst of when it feels like our hands are tied to do what we normally do? What can we do to make a difference? Because look what this guy's doing. He's riding across the country. And so, yeah, the money's fine, but the real gift was his journey. But what Erik did will forever be part of ASP's history. And this will become part of ASP lore. It really will. About the year 2020, when ASP canceled summer, one group leader got on a bicycle at the Pacific Ocean in California and rode all the way across the country to the Atlantic Ocean to raise money to make sure ASP would survive. I mean, I can hear the story shaping now, and it'll be a great story, and it will inspire for generations, not just right now.
You never know what you're going to get. Forrest Gump and his box of chocolates comes to mind, but there's a lot of really, really wonderful people out there in this really big country of ours. And I must say that you don't really know where and when you're going to meet those people, but you do. And they leave an impression on you, and you probably leave an impression on them. But I think that the more that there is communication and the more there is relationship building between people across the country, the more people will understand one another, the more people will appreciate where one another is coming from. And so I think for me, this was selfishly speaking, I found this to be a very eye-opening experience, but a very fulfilling experience as well. Hopefully I touched a few people along the way, and certainly with the money raised, I know that ASP will be able to touch a lot of people, and for that I'm very thankful.